The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.
We did it.
There we go.
Magic.
Apologies for everybody. I'm okay with some forms of technology and some digital platforms, but I'm still trying to figure out Instagram. So it's just one of those things. I'll get there eventually.
We did it. No, it's perfect. So thanks so
Perfect.
much for joining me, Douglas. I invited you to speak to me because I love your podcast, What Magic Is This? And the thoroughness in which you present one of my favorite subjects, which is magic.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun so far. It's been just over a year, and it's been very beneficial to my life, and it's been incredibly. The feedback has been very good, so I've enjoyed every second of it. So thank you for saying so.
Yeah, magic is a complex and vast subject, one of great controversy and one of many different factions and opinions. And I love that you are very thoroughly studied. It seems like you have read everything and that you've familiarized yourself with nearly every different system and kind of subject related to magic. And this gives you a very kind of like clear and lucid and level-headed approach to being able to discern what actually works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah, it's been. I would never ever say that I know every single system. As we were talking before we turned on the cameras, it's too much for one lifetime. You can study absolutely anything, and I talked about it in the Chaos Magic episode. There'll be points where I'll come across something, and I know immediately that if I dive into this, that's a year out of my life. That's just it's not gone as in it's a waste of time, but it's just I have to follow this route, and it's going to be wonderful. But there's just too much. There's too much for one life to say that I know absolutely everything about magic. Absolutely not. I the things that I am interested in, I know a lot about. I'll just put it that way.
Right. Yeah, well, something I love about magic is that there's a thread of magic and a tradition of it that exists in practically every culture in the world. And it seems to be one of those things that is inherent to the psychology of humankind as a whole in general. It's like we have a need for magic or something. It's just an aspect of culture that seems perennial, and yet it seems to also be so counter to what is kind of the mainstream belief system and outlook on reality. I think there are many people that would be mocking about the idea of being interested in magic, but for me, from a very young age, it was something that I was fascinated with and interested in, and my first brush up with kind of more quote unquote legitimate magic was reading Aleister Crowley books in high school. And that actually led me, interestingly enough, in down a kind of deeper path of meditation, because he basically says that meditation is the foundation of magic. And I kind of got so into meditating that the sort of interest or need to do any kind of enchantment sort of fell by the wayside because I was gaining so much benefit from meditating. And it's kind of funny that, to think about Aleister Crowley kind of leading me down like a more Buddhist path and stuff like that. But in later years, I've explored more of those sort of traditional systems and, Aleister Crowley and the Golden Dawn. I know that you have your opinions about that and chaos magic and stuff like that. But the more I look at it, the more I see that there is, that magic is somewhat scientific, and that there's this kind of ongoing experiment of people trying different things, recording their findings, and then writing about it. And it's almost like a peer review type system, and it's alive. And that's what I really love about magic.
The one of the things that I have issues with Crowley, as I think a lot of people do, but one of the things that Crowley said that was absolutely bang on, but I don't know if it's entirely, like, there's ways of reading into it, but he said that probably one of the only things that magic is good for is to write about. And and it's one of those things where, yeah, I get the need for people to try and come at magic in a scientific, from a scientific viewpoint. I tend to, if I'm going to be honest, when people say occult sciences or even occult philosophy, I'm always a little bit ambivalent, mainly due to the fact that I think that we're missing the forest for the trees in some respect. So I try to normally come at things from which is not, I don't see it a lot in a lot of magic podcasts or a lot of people talking about magic, or at least very few. I come at it from a phenomenological approach, where I think that to concentrate on the experiences and what the experiences are saying is far more important to me, because you can say that there's a tradition of magic. I tend to use the word continuum, where
Right.
tradition implies that there's a way that magic was done in the past, and then that's just the way that magic has always been done. Specifically, even in a Western context, you don't see that, especially if you start to look at the history of magic. But there is a certain continuum that appears with people trying and testing things. So I'm always far more interested in, what does the experience say from 1450 to about 1700. A lot of people were using grimoires. So there was a way that you could look at this and see, like, okay, well, what was the phenomena behind these? To actually visually see a spirit, to actually visually experience something that you could perhaps call to yourself or evoke. That to me shows more of that there's some kind of phenomena behind this stuff, as opposed to that they're scientifically trying to get to an answer as to what is going on. So I try to concentrate on what is the experience. That's what's more interesting to me. And what does that say? So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that people that try to claim that magic is a science are people that are like shy to fully come out of the closet. You know, they're trying to still kind of integrate into what would be a more mainstream and established worldview, rather than just letting their freak flag fly and being like, yo, I do magic and I love it, you know, and just not being ashamed of that. And I do think that, you know, I agree that it is like a continuum. And I think that it's more that there is this kind of, that magic is just something that you find in human communities all across the world from the beginning of human civilization, that there is some part of the human spirit that has an interest and use for magic. And, you know, I've had my own experiences with it to find it to be actually practically useful. And I'm sure you have as well, you know, which is why you've probably, you know, dedicated so much time into studying it. And that the mystery of that is just endlessly fascinating to me. How does our mind, how do we have the capabilities to impact the outcome of our reality and the unfolding of our reality simply with our mind and consciousness, you know? And
Absolutely.
Do you have any answers to that? Like, how does magic work in your eyes?
How does magic work? That's an incredibly tough question to answer. I think, and this might seem like a bit of a dodge, but when we try to put answers on the phenomena itself, that's where I kind of back away, because we fall into a model where we go to try and explain the things as to the how of the mechanics of ritual and spell and incantation, evocation, evocation, as opposed to just the how of to get to that point, which is far more interesting to me. I think that, how does magic work? Man, it depends what model you want to use.
Right.
if you think that there are spirits and spiritual creatures all around you, and that by uh, imploring their help or adjuring them to do things in your life, then that's the model you go with. I think you can go from a biological standpoint and just basically say that it's from an interaction that you have with things that are um, that are alive and around you. You could have the whole magical correspondences thing where it's like, well, it's obvious because the universe speaks some kind of symbolic language. So obviously you're doing something to interact with this. But as far as of all the questions to do with magic, how is always the most interesting, but less so much the idea of how it works. Uh, Peter Carroll said one of my favorite things ever, which is that magic works in practice and not in theory, which I think is absolutely bang on. We can try and explain the hows of magic, but for me, I've always been more interested in the doing the things and seeing what happens afterwards. It's something I brought up in my podcast over and over and over again, because I find a lot of people when they start magic, they get very textually based. They get Aleister Crowley's 777, and then that's their magic book, and then they just go from there. That's far too textual for me. I think meaning comes from engagement with the world, not from abstract contemplation of it. So when we get lost as to how to the how of magic, as interesting as they are, any of the explanations, whether you want to go to quantum physics, whether you want to go to some kind of an energy model or a spirit model, even something like dual aspect monism, they all work. They all work as explanations, but I'm just too enamored with the experience itself. I'll just put it that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's something irrational about magic, and it kind of it's somewhat contrarian to most people's worldview, and so we try to explain it and rationalize it, and it defies that. And there's a quality of that which makes it more engaging and alive. You know, I think that people are attracted to magic for that very reason.
Yeah, I go to the fact that just do the work, have the experiences, and then just sit with them. Just let them, you don't need to immediately have to put them in some kind of a category or a box. If you're seeing real world results from sigils to rituals to even demon or spirit evocation, immediately you want to be like, okay, I need to explain this. But I just say, like, just stick with the experience. You're experiencing something very, very, very old that is almost like an original intuition. If you have any children around you from anywhere in the world and you ask them whether or not that the river is alive, or you ask them whether or not do you see things around you that are there but they're not really there, they'll all answer yes. Like it's
For sure.
it's
I agree.
None of them are pushing their glasses up and going, well, actually it might have been that I was a little bit hungry and then perhaps I saw something. They know what they're doing. And so one of the most interesting things that I saw recently was a documentary about Chauvet Cave in France, it has cave paintings from 35,000 years ago, or maybe even more. And so the film is one shot, and it just goes through this cave. And caves are already very magical places. I'm sure we all agree on that. But there's this wonderful art of animals, and animals that haven't existed in lions, tigers, well, not tigers, lions and stuff like that haven't existed in France for centuries. But you can see a definite correlation that these people lived in a magical world, and that they were trying to, in some way, interact with it somehow through use of the use of symbolic thinking is as tied to magic as anything in the world. So I think that
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know what you're talking about. Oh, you're back.
okay.
Oh
Good.
yeah,
Sorry.
I know what you're talking about with those original paintings being mostly hunting scenes, and it was probably a magical act where by them envisioning the hunt and staging that in their mind's eye as their reality, it probably gave them greater hunting abilities.
Symbolic thinking is magic, period. Like there's no way around it. It's about as magical as we get. But again, I think that a lot of people concentrate on that idea of symbolic thinking having real world effects, and the how as to how that has real effects to the actual experience of draw a thing on cave wall, a scene of somebody killing a bison. Oh, we go out and kill bison. That initial experience to me is far more interesting than the hows of the explanation. So I know I just keep answering your first question over and over again, but I really do think that it's somewhat lacking in the occult world right now. I'll just put it that way.
Right. Yeah. And I remember in your Chaos Magic episode, you were talking about Kenneth Grant's usage of hypersigils. And as a visual artist myself, I've definitely... Grant Mortis. I'm sorry. There's Grant in the name of both of them. You can forgive me. But yeah, as a visual artist myself, I have explored at times how a work of art could be a magical object, or how it could influence either my own state of consciousness, or it could impact the unfolding of my reality in some way. And I have definitely found that to be the case. I think that you're imbuing so much psychic energy into something. It's like a sigil. I think that you are deeply imbuing your subconscious mind with the intention of that thing. So naturally it would have an impact. And I could imagine that that was probably the experience that those early cave painters had when they were working on those things.
Absolutely. It's very easy for us to, when we see that, especially as magicians and fans of the occult, to say that it's a painting in a cave of animals and hunting scenes, and immediately we'll jump on it and be like, oh, it's magic. And then others will be like, no, they were just painting what was going on around them. I don't think so. Again,
I don't think so either. No.
The whole idea of early symbolic thinking is indeed magic. As I mentioned, it's like that. It's pure and simple. You cannot get around that. I don't care how much archaeology or anthropology you have in you. You have to admit that there's something very magical going on. For people to go into caves, they weren't just sheltering all the time. Those were ritual spaces, right? Like whether we'd like to think so or not, there's no doubt in my mind that people go that deep into the cave to have some kind of an experience. So you can't separate the two for me. It's so obvious. It's so unbelievably obvious. And I think Picasso once, he went into, I think it might have been LaSalle. He went into one of the caves. They allowed him to come in and have a look. And of course, Picasso goes in there and he comes out and everybody wants to know what he thinks. And Picasso very, very clearly said, we have learned nothing. Like we haven't changed, right? So
yeah.
That like gives me incredible hope. It's like, well, he nailed it. I mean, as much as people have problems with how Picasso lived, he knew his art and he knew his symbolic thinking more than a lot of people. So
totally, yeah. And there's wisdom to that as well, I think, to kind of to void the sort of agenda of needing to make progress in some way, and rather to just kind of claim our humanity and to live that. I find when I raise the subject of magic, there's a particular cognitive dissonance that seems to arise in people where people both denounce it. They say, oh, that's bullshit, and at the same time are afraid of it. And that can exist in the mind of the same person as well, where somebody simultaneously is very disturbed by the idea and totally just says that you shouldn't, it's just bullshit, it's a waste of your time, you know? And there's something about that. It's like there's kind of like an old memory that exists within our DNA that we know there is something to magic and that it should be respected.
The big word that gets used a lot, specifically for people that are of the more materialist bent, is coincidence. It's all coincidence. If you talk to somebody who is a staunch materialist, scientism, that's what they do, and you just talk to them a little bit more about experiences they might have had, because you'll say, like, you've never to this hypothetical person, so you've never had a weird experience? And they go, absolutely not. And so you just try to tease a little thing out of them. It's like, so you've never thought about somebody, and then less than a minute later, they've called you, and they'll say, well, actually that has happened, but it's coincidence. And so, and then you go, well, okay, so then you haven't had an instance where some kind of really overt feeling came over you about somebody being ill or something like that, and then you find out not too long after that either they've passed away. And they go, yeah, but I think a lot of things in my mind, and that was just one of them. And so I'm putting selective attention in retrospect, and it's also a coincidence. And it's, to me, it's just like, this stuff happens all the time. I don't understand why there's just such a hesitance, because for them, it really doesn't make sense. And that, to me, is the most important thing. We have done such a good job of thinking we've explained absolutely everything in the world, and there's just this natural set of laws that we can measure, that we can observe, and that everything is good. And anything that might have some kind of a strange phenomena behind it, it doesn't make sense. But guess what? The universe, 94% of it, we have no idea what the fuck it is. Dark matter and dark energy has not been explained. So that 6% that we think that we know about, 94% that we have no idea about, I think that means that maybe we don't know exactly what's going on. Right. Just my intuition.
Yeah, and that 6% is just a model of the universe also, which doesn't mean it's the universe. It's just a model. And that's something I appreciate about kind of chaos magic philosophy, is the idea that our beliefs are just a utility, and that they should only be adopted when they're useful, and that you should discard and change your beliefs at will. You know, there's something very psychedelic about that.
Yeah, I think when a lot of people, they have to register as well that, specifically within chaos magic, because a lot of people say, well, you can just swap out superheroes for gods, or you can make superhero saints, or this kind of thing. You don't have to believe in something or sorry, I'll put it this a better way. You not believing in something does not mean it does not have great power to it. You can say that you don't believe in the Atlantic Ocean, but it's still there. You can say that you don't believe in, say, a pantheon of gods that we've always been attracted to, but they're still going to be there, right? So there's people need to, with the whole belief in chaos magic stuff, they need to also kind of park it and be like, there are currents of something that you can say that that's not really my thing, or I really don't believe in it at the moment, but they still are there, right? Like that's a really important thing, I think, for a lot of people that come to chaos magic initially. A lot of people just think that it's a supermarket where you can just take a belief off the shelf and then that's yours for a little bit. But guess what? Like there's tons of other stuff that you say you might not believe in, but they're still there. So.
Right. Yeah. I think that comes down to this sort of conflict between our views on reality and reality itself, you know, which is just that's a big subject in general. And it stretches also to what I said before about that 6% that we think we know being more or less just a model of the universe and not the universe itself. And even with magic, it's like how magic can work without you necessarily needing to believe in it. And I like when people say that. They're like, magic isn't a belief. There are certain practices that you can try and you can test out and see if it works.
Yep. You don't need to believe in weird stuff for weird stuff to happen to you. And if you talk to anybody from Jeffrey Kripal to Stephen Skinner to David Hufford, they will tell you about the enormous amounts of people who are within academia or within the sciences who come up to them and say, I have had this unreal experience. I'm afraid to talk about it because it goes against absolutely everything that I believe, and that has gotten me to the point where I'm at right now. Again, it's something that happens. Collectively, they will never come out and say, oh, by the way, I saw a giant green raccoon when I was camping on my way to the outhouse, and it started talking to me, and it actually told me how I can solve this crazy scientific problem that I've been working on for a little bit. I'll just say that it was a bit of a brainstorm, but this stuff happens constantly. It's unreal. So
Right.
you don't need to have the belief to begin with for this stuff to happen. It just
Right.
does.
And it comes down to socialization. I think that the resistance to admitting of that kind of stuff just comes down to the fear of being judged or not being accepted, and that has to do with the kind of dominant, the way things are basically, or the way we're programmed to be considered normal. And fortunately, I don't really have much investment in being normal, so I have no problem in admitting to interests in magic and things like
Yeah.
that. But I wanted to ask you, because there is a lot of fear that surrounds magic, even for people that are of the spiritual inclinations and they're not denying its validity. And people say that it's very dangerous, especially to use goetia and those types of things. I'm curious about your opinion on that, if you think that magic is in any way dangerous, or if there have ever been a kind of negative consequences to its practice.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But every activity has dangers. Like you could love cooking, and still there's so many things that are involved with cooking that will harm you. You can set yourself on fire. You can burn your house down. Any kind of activity has downsides. As far as the idea of working with spiritual entities or the Goetia, this kind of thing, I find that, and this is just the way that I always come at things. I find that a lot of people will pick up something like the Ars Goetia or the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, and they'll just get cracking. I've never worked in that way. I want to learn as much about the history of how the Ars Goetia became a thing. And so what does that lead to? One of my more recent episodes was about ancient Greek magic. And the word Goetia comes from gues, which means howling. So it initially came from a kind of wailing or a funerary practice that was wild and emotional, and it was mainly done by women. So I think that for a lot of people that have this fear specifically with certain practices, do the research as to the history of not just the terms that you're using, but the practices that they came from. So as far as Goetia, although you're summoning demons, the word goes to the dead. It goes to an emotional response. So that's kind of my little jailbreak that I go to. So it's like, okay, so this is something inanely human, strangely enough, in us, the tragedy of death. And so that's the main fear that I had to deal with. So by analyzing where these practices come from, I kind of safeguard myself from certain things that will happen to me once I start interacting with this kind of magic. But I think that a lot of people, they will just pick up a book and give her without the idea of looking into how such practices came to be. And one of the worst places to look for a history of magic is by books by magicians. Magicians have an incredibly terrible view of history. I'll just say that. And there's some that aren't. Jake Stratton-Kent, Stephen Skinner. There's guys that are practicing magicians that actually do the historical homework. But for me, I've always felt, and that just might be the way that I'm hardwired, that by learning the history of how the practices came to be, I safeguard myself against certain malevolent or malefic things that can happen because it arises from us. Magic comes from us. We're the ones doing it. And it comes from real emotions and real feelings and real places and instances that are as timeless as us ourselves. So I think that if you're hesitant about working with angels, working with demons, again, I hate the term work, interacting, find out a little bit more about it. Don't just give her. And then once you see that there is a very human aspect to why people initially wanted to do these things, that's your little inroad in to be like, okay, so with the Goetia, they might be spirits of the dead, or they might be, well, truthfully, a lot of them come from the stars. That's a little teaser. I'll do an episode about it some way. A lot of people think that it's the old pagan gods that the Christians just made them into demons. Some of them, not all of them. A lot of them come from the stars. So maybe
Totally.
if you start doing a little bit more of the star lore stuff of, say, Hellenistic Mediterranean, That's another way of protecting yourself. Just learn a bit more, I'd say, and learn from people that aren't magicians. One of the greatest resources for history of magic is the Penn State University Press. It's called Magic in History, and it will completely reverse most of what I like to call gift shop magic, which is what the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley and Eliphas Levi, what they propagate as the true history of magic. Their magic looks very different than the way that magic was actually historically practiced. It's very, very vastly different. And so as far as the fear, my fear, the way to safeguard myself from fear is look into the history. But as far as doing things that will cause bad things to happen in your life, that's going to happen regardless. I hate to say it. And it's not one of those freewheeling things. You will go insane sometimes if you do the stuff. I mean, what's a good, there's a book called Howlings that I believe Scarlet Imprint put out, and it was all about the Goetia. And the very first essay is about Hughes Barlow. Forget Clark Hughes Barlow. I'm totally butchering his name, but he's like, yeah, I'm messing with the spirits, and it was the worst time of my life. It really was, and I went insane. Tons of bad things happened, but the amount of stuff that I learned and my growth was beyond beneficial. So bad things are going to happen. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be doing rock climbing. You could be doing jogging. Bad things are going to happen. So
totally. And I think there are similarities because they're both explorations into consciousness between the practices of magic and the use of psychedelics. And it's the same thing where there's a great deal of fear and paranoia around the, infamous bad trip. But sometimes the challenging experiences that can come through from those types of experiences can be very educational, very rewarding, and very healing in their own way, as well as they can be fragmenting and they can have negative consequences as well. But to say that psychedelics are dangerous or magic is dangerous, I think it's just best to have a respect to these practices and to go about it with reverence, and before we got on this call, we were talking a little bit about the practices here in Bali and how people that come to this place and don't take the spiritual influences here seriously seem to suffer consequences around that. And the more people seem to respect and pay careful attention to the traditions and practices of this island seem to have an easier time than those that don't. And I think that in general, it's very important to go into magic with respect and with reverence, especially if you're going to be invoking any kind of entities whatsoever.
It's fuck around and find out territory with any kind of magic that you're going to be going into. Just the same as like if you were going to a small village somewhere in Mexico. You act like an idiot, bad things are going to happen, right? Like it's if you go to a specific area, bad things are going to happen. If you go to a certain kind of magic as a tourist without realizing that the whole fuck around and find out mentality exists, whether you like to think so or not, come with some respect, come with some kind of clarity, and respect also means education. Educate yourself, as I mentioned, do a little bit of history research, or at least try to find out not so much the psychology, but the emotional gravity behind the practices themselves. That is incredibly important. When I travel, and it's just because what I do, I find out absolutely everything that I can about where I'm traveling to. It's just, that's just what I do. Like I don't, as much as I'd love to go there and have the magic unfold, I like to find out what happened beforehand, what's going on, what's the religion of the place. That's just what I do. So I think a lot of people don't realize that the whole idea of coming in without any without any kind of safeguard or without any kind of knowledge, yeah, some magic will happen, but also you do open yourself up to some crazy shit. Same thing goes for psychedelics. Same thing goes for drugs. Like that's a very apt example. But as you were mentioning, people that have the fear of the bad trip, in my experience, sometimes those are the ones you learn the most from, without a doubt. It's nice to have a good time.
Definitely.
But when there's hard work to do, that's when you actually find yourself.
Absolutely. This is something I wanted to ask you, and because I haven't really discovered this so much. I appreciate chaos magic as a rather modern approach to magical practice in the West. But to your knowledge, is there any sort of strictly 21st century magical movement that is present and alive right now? Are there still magical orders like the IoT that are practicing and discovering new techniques?
There's always things being added, definitely new techniques. Um, but as far as where they come from, probably from some older magic as well. If Aidan Walker is releasing a book called Weaving Fate, in which he goes through hypersigils, but he does it in a very interesting way, in a way to by journaling basically, and
Yeah.
a form of writing about your future to try and make it happen. You could kind of think of that as new magic, right? But it's also some pretty old magic done in a different way. As far as magical currents that are that will be as prevalent as, say, something like chaos magic, to my knowledge, no. Some people are really big on mimetic magic from, man, I forget the author's name, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely new currents, but new magical movements as big as something like chaos magic, not really. And I don't know if there ever will be. Lester Bangs once said something very incredible. He said that there will come a time, and he died in either the late 70s or the early 80s. He said, I doubt that that there will be a time that we'll ever agree on things as much as we agreed on the Beatles or Elvis. What he's trying to say there is that there was less avenues for us to interact with that kind of music. Same thing goes for magic. There's so much magic out there, to get everybody to kind of be like, oh, that's the magic that we're going to go for, like chaos magic did for a period of time. I don't think we're ever going to see those times again. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll throw a Lester Bang quote around if I can. But the real point is that there's a lot of good magic out there. You can go anywhere, and there's tons of new techniques being talked about and tons of new ways of doing it. But as far as movements that are going to come around a specific set of techniques, I don't know if we're ever going to see that ever again.
Where would you recommend that people start if they're interested in the practice of magic? Are there any kind of universal, fundamental techniques or practices that you'd suggest people do and explore?
Starting out,
Yeah, like if people didn't have time to read any books and they just wanted to try something that they could see if they have an effect with it.
yeah, the biggest one I keep talking about, and I think it's very beneficial because so many segments of the rest of the fucking world do it, and for some reason we don't. Ancestral reverence.
Totally.
Find a place in your home of the people. This could be kind and this can be kin. Could even have a picture of your childhood pet up there. Pay some respect to the things that came before you. Start talking with them. Talk to them as if they're in the room with you, because chances are they actually are. But I think that it's so unbelievably crucial that the dead that came before us, they're not being given the respect that they deserve, specifically in a Western context. There's so many different ways of doing an ancestral altar. There are no universals. There's some books out there. Honoring Your Ancestors by Mallory Vaudois is a good one. Even Communing with Spirits by Martin Coleman. Aiden's got a section on ancestors in his book. But respecting ancestors, giving them a place in your home, specifically what you have for them, where you have incense, you have candles, maybe even a glass of water for them. You might pour some Florida water in there. Putting out a glass of wine if your ancestors enjoyed wine, putting a glass of wine out for them, maybe some candy. And then sit in front of your altar for once a week. Sure, just to start out with, once a week, sit down, have a conversation. Guess what? To begin with, you're going to think you're making it all up. You're not. Like there's something's going to start talking to you, no matter what kind of model you try to put on. It's just my psychology trying to talk to me. Even that is useful. But guess what? The rest of the world, not the rest, not it's not a universal, but a lot of cultures do this.
Yeah.
So many. And we've somehow forgotten about it. That's probably the first inroads. You don't need to learn the best banishing ritual of the pentagram. You don't need to learn the star ruby. Put a place in your home, have pictures of them, candles, incense, half an hour to start off with, once a week, sit, talk. Don't ask them for anything to begin with. Just talk. That's all. Things will happen. Go from there.
Yeah, and that is one of the fundamental beliefs and practices here in Bali. They do it all the time. And everything they do really is in devotion to their ancestors and honoring them. And there is an altar in every single home that every single morning they pray to. It's such a huge aspect of their lives. And I think that it does give them a greater sense of satisfaction in life. I think it helps them feel more connected to their lineage and to their history, and to also feel supported by their ancestors, you know, because I think that people in Western culture often feel totally alone. And one of the really valuable sort of key points of magic is that we're not alone, that there are forces unseen all over the place that are there to help us if we need help at any time, whether they're our ancestors or archangels or, you know, whatever it may be.
You, if you're lucky and you don't hate your family, like some people, there's family members that have been very deleterious to their lives. I get it. You get to choose who you put on your altar. If you're lucky and you're the people that were alive while you were alive and then have since passed away, you already have something to work with. You already have not just the memories of them, but certain smells that you equate with them, certain feelings that you get when they were still alive. That is an incredible reward for you to begin working with these people, to not just conjure up the memories, but it's so beneficial to be able to sit with the idea for a little while of, you know, if they were still around, what would I say to them? Would you thank them? Would you thank them for having an impact in your life? Half an hour. That's all it takes. Once a week to start off with. I thank my ancestors every fucking day. I give them food once a week, flowers every week. Start there. It really is beneficial. And even if magic is bullshit, and I've said this before, even if magic is bullshit, the benefits of an ancestral altar and honoring ancestors and remembering is also very good, provided your family weren't terrible to you. So, but I'm sure that everybody has ancestors. I call them the kindly ones. It's people you might not have pictures of, or you might not have known in the flesh. You might not. You have very vague you have stories of them perhaps, but you know that they did good things. Or even if you have no idea whatsoever, an altar with a blank picture frame in it, those are the kindly ones. There are people in your lineage who have made the world a better place merely by being in it. Thank those people. That's a very big thing. So.
Absolutely. And our ancestors is, you know, thousands and thousands of people. So just to pay reverence for that and for our existence also, which is a precious gift.
Yeah.
But we have like maybe 5-10 minutes left. I wanted to ask you, because magic is such a broad subject. It comes from so many different cultures and there are so many different facets of it. What in magic is really inspirational to you right now? Are there any subjects within magic that you are just really gung-ho about in this moment?
Right now, I'm re-dipping my toe into spiritualism, which is late 19th century. It's when people thought that they were talking to ghosts, and then Harry Houdini said that they weren't. They were. They very definitely were. And so I'm going through the work of Frederick Myers again. CD Broad is very interesting to me right now. So and this is one of those things that is so overlooked within magicians and the occult right now, because people like Blavatsky and Crowley and the Golden Dawn did such a good job of trying to say that these people were idiots and assholes. And and Houdini, obviously, they thoroughly demolished the idea of spiritualism. But truth be told, their magic was 1,000 times more effective than any of those motherfuckers. So I always come back about once every 5 years, or well, 4 years. I go back into spiritualism to just to look into it. And so that's what's right now. I'm really going through some of the things that were written at the time by a lot of the skeptics. And it's very strange because a lot of the skeptics, we'd like to think that they weren't as skeptical as we are now, obviously, because they didn't know as much. A lot of the skeptics are like, this is some crazy shit, and I don't know how to talk about this. Every once in a while, I will see them doing something like that looks like clear trickery, and then something else will occur that is beyond explanation. So right now, for me, I'm dipping for probably the fourth time, just reading up as much as I can from the Society of Psychical Research and the work, books like The Irreducible Mind and Beyond Physicalism that go into some of the effects that occurred during spiritualism. That's really my jam right now. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think
More
that
spirit.
stuff is really interesting as well. I think it's fascinating that within kind of a contemporary spiritual culture, and I live in a rather spiritual community, that most people know very little about this stuff. The kind of history of Western spirituality as it existed in the 19th century and in both the Americas and in Europe. And it's just, to me, it's really interesting, and it gives me a sense of sort of lineage, I guess, to understand where it all comes from, but most people don't know about
Spiritualism,
it.
spiritualism was just another blip of a 40,000 to 100,000 continuum of spirit interaction. Like, it wasn't new. The way that they went about doing it was somewhat new, but it was just another point of this interaction that we've had for as long as we've probably been around, or at least been able to say that we've been around. So that to me is so thoroughly overlooked in the occult right now that it's kind of embarrassing. But if I think it was Gordon White that put it really well. He basically said that if John Dee or Thomas Rudd had the information that the spiritualists had and were writing down in the 19th century, if they had that and were looking through the notes, they would go like, what on earth? Like, you guys are talking about almost the exact same thing we are, but doing a far better job of it. That to me just like it's really speaks volumes. Like we have from near-death experiences to children saying that they had a past life. This is we'd like to think that it's all those books that you find in the supermarket as you're about to check out, but these are very real stories, and the experiences that they have are very real. So spiritualism is just one point on that continuum. And I'll say it again. I think a lot of occultists would do very well with looking into this material. Just be curious. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that there's great power in testimony as well, and that not everything needs to be empirically researched, but if there are, hundreds, if not thousands of people talking about a particular phenomenon, then that gives it credibility.
Yeah, very much so. And the Society for Psychical Research, people don't realize this. They were more curious than anybody. They had better structures for being skeptical than anybody at the time, and probably almost even to this day. And they still have some incredibly puzzling evidence that makes them would make anybody go, what is going on here? So it's something that I think that right now, currently, I'm loving dipping it back. I found it's called Lectures on Psychical Phenomena, I believe, by C.D. Broad, who was one of the heads of the Society for Psychical Research. It's 600 pages, and it's dense, and I understand that not everybody's going to read it, but I'm having my mind blown almost every 2 or 3 pages. Like, it's that interesting to me. So,
Wow.
yeah, like it's a thick book. It's a thick book, but it's unreal, the stuff that this guy was digging up from research that was done in the 19th century. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to checking that out. I love I mean, magic is such a broad subject, and sometimes I wish there was I don't know, a better word for it, but I'm comfortable with the word magic, I guess. But
That works.
it's just such a, yeah, it's such a behemoth of a subject when you start to get into it and to discover that there are so many different facets of it, and from so
Endless.
many, yeah, it's endless. You could really spend your entire life studying it and barely scratch the surface.
You could just glance off the surface, truthfully. Like it's a bottomless bag of absolute delight. If you want to just, if you literally don't want to do a practical spell in your entire life, you can still devote your life to magic. Uh, and that's just one part of it. To do that and also do it practically, 10 lifetimes wouldn't be enough. Not even close. So,
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much for doing this, man. This is a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time to come and talk to me about magic. On a, what day is it? Is it on a Wednesday
Wednesday.
Wednesday
Wednesday.
morning?
Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect. No, I could talk about this at any time of day. I really hope to talk to you again, Jake. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, let me know if you want to do another one of these sometime. Thank you so much.
Always. No problem.
Cool, man. And thank you for everybody who has listened. I hope that this inspires you and you find this magical and interesting.
Me too.
Cool, man. Be well. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.